Good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Lytle. I'm the Executive Director of Province 1, and I'm happy to welcome you to Deacons Talking on the Road to Emmaus. This is a monthly program that's a cooperation between the Deacons of Province 1 and the Episcopal Province of New England, and we're very happy to be expanding our network to include all of the deacons that are a part of the Association for Deacons. Today we have the good fortune of having Lori Mills-Curran, the Executive Director of the Association, as well as Keith McCoy, who is the Director of the Fund for the Diaconate. And they're going to be sharing with us things from their experience about the economics of being a deacon and how the fund is available to support you. So let me turn it over first to Lori and then to Keith. I'd invite you to explain who you are a little more and then give us the presentation. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to do it. My name is Lori Mills-Curran. I have been a deacon for 30 years in 5 dioceses, and that actually is relevant information for my presentation. I run a nonprofit, a mission hub in the Diocese of Massachusetts, which is the Boston area, half of Massachusetts. And I work with Brazilian immigrants in immigration advocacy. I also am the executive director of the Association for Episcopal Deacons. I'm beginning my 6th year, I think, with that. And I am very fortunate in that I have a longstanding interest in helping people understand CPG and gain access to it if it's possible. And I've had quite a saga of how I've gotten to where I am, and things are really very much more open to that possibility than before. And I'm happy to share that information with you. Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith McCoy. I'm a deacon from the Diocese of New Jersey, and I've been ordained for 33 years.
Aha.
I recently retired after 40 years as a public library administrator. And I've had a varied ministry over the years. I started out doing youth work, and then my rector changed, and I was sort of afloat for about a year or so, and then I was called to chair the resuscitation of a deacon formation program in the diocese. And I did that for several years until the bishop changed. And then I spent a couple of years trying to herd the gay and lesbian deacons of the diocese. And then when our new bishop came in, he asked me to become one of the archdeacons. And I did that during George Council's tenure, resigning 5 years when he retired. And I've been on the board. I was on the NAD board, earlier incarnation of AED, for about a little over a term. And I've been on the board for the Fund for the Diaconate since 2001. I've been president of it since 2015.
And you're moving it into a new era, too.
Yeah, we've had a strategic plan, and we are aiming to make ourselves useful to the deacons of the Episcopal Church instead of hiding our light under a bushel. And we work very closely with AED.
We're a dynamic duo.
We are. We work well together.
So what should we do, Julie? Just go ahead and get started, or? Okay. So like I said, I've been ordained 30 years, and the reason why that's relevant is because I've been in 5 dioceses. And I got into the pension fund sort of by a fluke. I've written a little bit about this, different places. I had given up on my diaconate when I moved from one diocese to another. I've given up on my diaconate twice in the 30 years because I would be in one diocese and I would be perfect, stellar deacon, and then I would move to another diocese, usually because of my husband's work, and then I would be a problem. And what I didn't know, but it's becoming clearer now, that there were different kinds of diaconal theologies out there in the world. And we think we've got some clarity on what they are now, and we think that there are 7 in total and 4 still functioning. And the reason why that matters is when I got to the Diocese of Boston, the Boston Diocese, I was the wrong kind of deacon. They wanted a completely different kind of deacon, and they wanted them to move around every 2 years. And I had school-age children, and I couldn't do that. So I just didn't worry about trying to be a deacon. And I got a job as a director of religious education, and a job that hardly exists anymore. But at any rate, I did get a job as a director of religious education. And when they asked me, did I want to contribute to the lay pension fund, we all thought that I was being employed in the capacity of a lay person. CPG refused to sign me up. And they said that I was ordained, I was recorded with the recorder of ordinations, which is an independent function that CPG also fulfills. And if we're in their records as an ordained person, then we can't be put into the pension fund, the lay pension fund. They have like a 501(c), or you know what I mean, like a 401k only for nonprofits. And so CPG fought with my parish to get me into the clergy pension fund. And the argument didn't last long, but my experience with CPG has always been super positive. I've been to Credo twice. And when you go to Credo, which is the retreat they give you to kind of retread Episcopal clergy, very few deacons get to go because it is funded by CPG. But when you go to Credo, they have you think about something that you really want to pursue, and they call it your B-HAG, your Big Hairy Audacious Goal. And while I was there, I was really overcome with how privileged I was to be there. And I talked to a lot of people about why aren't deacons in the pension fund? And I discovered a lot of information and a lot of impediments. And I just decided that I was going to try to make it my goal to see whether or not information could be more broadly shared. And over the course of these 15 years, I have really argued with a lot of deacons about whether CPG is the problem. And what I've discovered is that with CPG is not the problem. The problem is the system we have is designed for a different era, and we're trying to cram people into a system that was designed really in the 1950s as a sort of like a union. It wasn't designed in the 50s, but it is a corporate model of corporate benefits. And so a lot of things are changing at CPG right now, and a lot more information is going out there. And I'll just give Keith a chance to talk, and then I can tell you some bits and pieces of the new information and how it impacts deacons.
Well, the fund for the Diaconate came about originally due to the failure of the church pension fund. The brief history is that church pension fund was started back around beginning of World War I, and it was for all ordained persons. And then the question was, well, are deaconesses ordained? And they went back and forth for a while, and the history is a little murky as to whether the deaconesses were originally included and thrown out or were never included to begin with. But the women got together in December of 1927, and they said, fine, if you're not going to let us in, we're going to start our own pension system. So they created the Retiring Fund for Deaconesses in the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America. And they said they wouldn't give out any pensions to their members until they could raise $50,000. At that first meeting, they collected almost 200, and at the depths of the Depression, they actually collected 50,000 by 1932. And they started supporting those of their membership who did not have any wherewithal. Lori mentioned the fourth wave of deacons earlier, before some of you joined, where deacons were ordained only if they had the financial resources to sustain themselves. A lot of the deaconesses came from wealthy families and from education, and they didn't need the resources of the retiring fund. But others did, and for many years, until we stopped ordaining deaconesses in 1970, we supported them in nursing homes and for other people to take care of them, and supplementing their meager Social Security and things like that. The the deaconesses started to fade away in the early 80s, and that's when the fund sort of became quiescent. They let men in starting in 1989, and for a long time we labored under the delusion, I would say, that we would give you money if you could hunt us down, but we weren't going to advertise ourselves. We weren't going to make ourselves known. So over the last 10 years, we've been trying to change that. There's been some internal resistance. We think that's over now. And hopefully you saw our mailing last August where we asked the membership to approve a revision to our bylaws and our certificate of incorporation. Those passed, and we are looking forward to a future where we can use our assets for not just supporting deacons in need in their last years, but we can support deacons who have a need for spiritual development, education, networking, things like that.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'd like to say is that if you don't understand the 7 historical waves of diaconal theology, it's very difficult to understand why deacons are treated so erratically across the nation, and why people who think that those waves are sequential are mistaken. The last 4 are still in operation, but the first 3, and an important point to understand about economic justice for deacons, is that the first 3 waves of the diaconate, actually the first 4 waves of the diaconate, had different economic assumptions about what deacons were going to be. The first 2 waves of the diaconate were the black deacons who worked in colored work, that was the term, and the brown deacons who were ordained to do work out on the reservations. And those folks were not ever made priests on purpose because they did not want to pay them well, and they did not want them to vote or have voices in the corridors of power. They were kept out of General Convention, and it was a part of the racial and economic justice problems of that era. The deaconesses, who were consecrated, not ordained, blah, blah, blah. There's a million reasons why you think they're not ordained, even though everything looks like they're ordained. They were the first professional educated women's class in the Episcopal Church. And in a sort of a crazy act of kind of bass backwards, as my mother used to say, feminism, they were all converted into deacons without, some of them were very much pro that, but they disassembled the deaconesses' women's-led structures of power and education in a feminist action when they started to allow women to be deacons. So the first 3 waves were these 3 waves that were economically distressed or controlled. The 4th wave was only about 500 guys who were ordained right after World War II, and they were not allowed to change dioceses, not allowed to change parishes. They had no servant or prophetic identity whatsoever. They were people, by canon law, they were required to have an independent income. And that was because they were senior warden emeritus who was going to be trained by one guy to serve one church to baptize all the baby boom. And that was really, there were very few of them, and they did not have, and their economic there was no economic issue for them because their position of privilege was considered to be the essential credential for their ordination. So when you look at this from an economic perspective, you see that there's all this old baggage, both racism, sexism, injustice, and economic privilege driving this car. So that's happening on the deacon side. On the priestly side, they started the pension fund in right around the time of World War I, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and several very important rich people got together in New York, and they were ashamed that Episcopal clergy were living in poverty. Deacons weren't even on the radar screen, and they decided that they would gather charitable dollars to fund a pension fund that would be designed to be self-supporting in the long, infinitely. It was actually the prototype for Social Security. So people would pay in, and then they would get, other people would pay out. And what happened then with regard to the pension fund is that they did save a lot of Episcopal priestly clerics from poverty. But as the Episcopal Church got more and more important, became a destination church for people of lower economic status, the pension fund gathered more and more and more and more money. And over the course of time, they've had fewer and fewer and fewer people to support. So now the pension fund is grossly overfunded in some ways, somewhat overfunded in other ways, but it functions under laws that require its assessments. Every cleric has a right to 18% of their compensation to be withheld to fund this thing. And the reason why there's been difficulty with all of this is that there was no clarity as to whether deacons were ever to be included. They were not included for the first 50 years of it. So what we have now is a situation where the pension fund functions like a corporation pension fund. If you pay in your corporation assessments, then you get a pension out of it. It is not a charity. Many, many deacons don't understand this. It's not a bag of charitable dollars through which services are provided to certain clerics and not to others. It is actually, they're not governed by ERISA, which I'm a lawyer, so if I get too technical, give me a break, but they're not governed. It's not that they can't spend, they just can't spend their money on anybody except the people that give money to them. So when you say to them, oh, it's not fair that deacons can't go to Credo, that's like saying to Toyota, why don't you give me a pension? I know I work for Ford, but you should give me a pension anyway. So that was where things were in 2006 when I got there. I was saying to the people at Credo, why can't deacons go to Credo? And they were, or why can't deacons be in the pension fund? And they were saying things to me like, well, there's no way to pay for Credo for deacons because they don't pay assessments. So as time has gone by, though, that has greatly changed, and more and more and more deacons are employed by churches. An interesting thing about it, though, is that deacons are not educated as to what their rights are. Most frequently, deacons are deployed by deacon directors or archdeacons or by bishops. They are not deployed by deployment officers or administrative persons in a diocese. So the normal education that priests get about how to position their compensation such as to maximize the size of their pension and their accessibility to benefits, that enculturation never happens with deacons. And generally, we don't go to things like Fresh Start. So there are many, many deacons who have eligibility for pensions, but are convinced that they do not. There's also a wave of theology of the diaconate which disapproves of deacons having any compensation from churches at all. The fifth wave of the diaconate was what we would call what is generally referred to as the official servant of the church. Now that was the new diaconate that started in 1970. Many, many people disapproved of the poor education and the lack of training of the perpetual deacons. And so in many of those dioceses, a deal was made that these people, the new deacons, the new fourth wave official servant deacons, they will never have their ordinations recorded. They will not be treated as clerics. They will sign away any possible discernment to the priesthood because we don't want all these uneducated people coming in through the back door. And that created a situation where not only are deacons being deployed and not being told that they're entitled to assessments, it created a wave of deacons who got their spirituality met by a chosen phase of poverty. This was the spirituality that was sold to them. And actually, I think I bought it. That was the spirituality I personally was ordained under. You were people that were going to give away your whole life to the church. And in that was your moral credibility, that you were, as an official servant of the church, more equipped. And as we merged into the sixth wave, which was the prophetic wave, many, many deacons adopted the prophetic wave of the diaconate when the official servant wave looked like it undercut lay ministry. Because if we're the official servants, then why do they have to do diaconia too? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of theological excuses for the church to continue deacons, to fail to provide deacons with education and strategies for rendering themselves eligible. So now, the reason why, one of the major objections that I have to this worldview, there are many deacons that don't believe that deacons should ever be compensated. I know one who believes that it ruins her ability to be a prophet and is morally objectionable because her power is rooted in her powerlessness. And for those deacons, I would ask them to consider a couple of arguments. One is that this creates a cadre of deacons who are wealthy, old, and white. And it also creates a cadre of young adults who would like to be deacons, but can't understand why the hell the church doesn't compensate them when we say that we're the official servants of the church or the official conscience of the church. And I've had 2 young deacons say to me, why is our conscience unfunded? And I think that's a pretty barren question. So my goal is to, I have several goals. One is to help deacons understand that there are theological reasons why we are not compensated, and some of us believe those to be good. So we are by no means in agreement about that. And that the diaconate's theology does not vary by diocese. It varies by bishop. So you are in a diocese. You are the proper kind of deacon for that diocese. You are compensated. You get a new bishop, and they don't want you to get any compensation, and suddenly you're a problem deacon. And those kinds of things are the motivations for doing a variety of financial strategies that parishes do, dioceses do, and deacons do, all of which essentially affirm again and again and again in our experience that if we look for compensation, it is greedy and wrong. So now I have lots and lots of ideas to talk about how deacons are compensated. And one of the most interesting things is how CPG has done an incredible job. They've just done their first deacon research. They've never done it.
Can I take over for a little bit here?
Yes, absolutely. Please
do. It's part of the reinvention of the fund for the diaconate. Our board met twice a year at 815 2nd Avenue, church headquarters. Yeah. And as we started to reinvent ourselves about 10 years ago, one of our members, who was a diocesan administrator, said, you know, I think I can get us into the church pension group offices for our meetings. And so we started having meetings there about 4 years ago, right around the time Lori joined our board. And we were like alien creatures to them. They had no idea about deacons, you know, like, who are these people? And then all of a sudden they realized that there's 3,000 of us in the church. And they thought, that's a whole market we're missing. And all of a sudden they've been paying attention to us. So as Lori started to talk about before I interrupted, they just, last year they did a big survey of the state of the diaconate. And at the beginning of the year, you may have read that they've changed their rules for eligibility. And that's part of our educating CPG on the breadth of the diaconate, the ministry that we're doing, and our value to the church and potential participation in their in the fund. And
that survey came directly out of AED's work because I was, and the fund's work, of course, too, because I was going to AED, who had had a very cool relationship with CPG, and basically saying to them, well, maybe we could have somebody come and educate us about it. I think some deacons might need to know this. And we do have an archdeacon and deacon formation directors conference every year. And I called up CPG and I said, is there anybody who can come teach us anything? And they said, well, I don't know. It'll be really expensive. Maybe not, maybe not. And then 3 days later, somebody called and said, can the CEO come, Mary Kate Wold, because we're involved in a massive campaign of trying to figure out how we're going to use all this money to benefit the ministries of the church. So Mary Kate Wold and her next in line and her personal assistant, I could go on and on, but these people are pretty impressive New Yorkers, And she came out and she gathered 12 deacons, and she wanted to hear the stories of why deacons are so mad at CPG. Why do all the deacons hate CPG? And it was a very interesting conversation because we didn't pull any punches. And in fact, she had lunch with these 12 archdeacons that she wanted to speak to. And then when she got into the big session of all of the archdeacons, which is about 65 people, she was trying to give a presentation and they wouldn't let her give a presentation. They basically made her segue over. We didn't want to hear about how great she was doing at taking care of their wonderful investments. We wanted to hear how the hell can we get access to some of these wonderful investments. So it was very interesting. She went home, they did the survey, and they've discovered some really interesting things about deacons. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how do people render themselves eligible for CPG. And then I don't want to take up all the time. I want to make sure that, Keith, you get to tell them more about where the fund is going to. But I'll just tell you, there are a variety of threshold issues of reasons why deacons can't get into CPG. Number one, people who are under the age of 40 or under the age of 50 don't know, but many dioceses only approved the diaconate, the renewal of the diaconate in 1970s, with the express proviso that these people would never be recorded. So if you are not recorded as an ordained individual by the Episcopal Church, what do? Well, AED for 20 years had better records than CPG did of who was a deacon in this country. It's amazing to think that they didn't actually keep track of their ordained people. But we did find out that we did, because we knew nobody was. So now what they're doing is they are trying to keep track. But if you're not in CPG and you call up CPG and you want to get in CPG and they say, oh, well, you can't get in because we never heard of you, it's because your ordination is not recorded. And still many, many deacons are unrecorded and are not officially clerics in this church. They don't know it. But when they go ahead.
Although when we had our last meeting there in October, Matt Price, who's their chief statistician, said they thought the discrepancy was down to about 100 to under 200, probably closer to 100.
I think it's close to 100. It was 275 when we started.
Yeah.
But CPG has gone out of their way to contact all those people directly, asking them to record themselves. Now, this caused some problems with some bishops who don't want to record us. So they were taking their life in their hands. Another thing that happens is that their staffing is not as good as it once was. Their staffing assumes that we know what we're doing and that the best thing for the cleric whose assessments are in arrears is for them to go fight with the parish. And what we know as deacons is that if persons are being compensated, the parish has always told them that they're being compensated as a layperson if they're compensated at all. The bishops will stand in their shoes and say to their archdeacons, well, deacons aren't in the pension fund. No assessments are necessary. And that has always been a violation of canon law. And CPG was astounded when I told them some of these stories of what they call them, sophisticated dioceses. Diocese of Podunk, they're used to messing up the rules, but sophisticated dioceses who have archdeacons and are paying their archdeacons $15,000, $20,000 a year to be their archdeacon, those dioceses are the ones that are a problem. Another problem is that deacons, up until quite recently, deacons oftentimes their compensation was structured such that it was a stipend, not a salary, or you don't meet the definition of I'm so sorry. You don't meet the definition of employment under state law, or we've carefully structured you to be a contractor. You're not an employee. And in the past, that was significant. But one of the most significant things that CPG has done is they have 5 criteria now for you to be eligible for the pension group. One of them is to have a letter of agreement with your parish. Another one is to be held out as a cleric of that parish. So if you are assigned by your bishop to a parish, you're eligible for the pension fund starting January 1, 2018. Now, does that mean you get assessments? No, it means that we have a huge educational task to educate everybody that if a deacon gets anything, then they are eligible for assessments to be assessed. The most important thing that they did, though, and this was both for us and for non-stipendiary priests, is it used to be, it was a very minimal standard, but in order to be eligible for CPG, you had to have 3 months of employment, consecutive employment with a sum of $200, $300 per month. They have completely eliminated the minimum compensation as of January 1 this year. This means that if your diocese chooses to require every parish to give a deacon $100 a month of any kind of compensation, stipend, salary, anything except receipted reimbursements, you get for that month a month of eligibility for CPG. Now, you're not going to get a very big pension at $100 a month, but you are eligible for being in CPG. That gets you into Credo, that gets you insurance, that gets you some really interesting, useful things. And this is the kind of thing that what's going to have to happen is all the deacons have to educate themselves about whether or not they're eligible for CPG, remove the impediments that keep them from being in CPG, and start to regard CPG as an ally, not as an enemy. Because as far as CPG is concerned, the fact that right now they know from their data that of the deacons who gave them information in that survey, who they evaluate as entitled to assessments, they know that only 46% of those deacons entitled to assessments are having assessments properly paid. 46%, less than half. This would be tolerated by no other order, and it is a vast embarrassment to them, and they consider it to be worthy of a major educational campaign, and that's what we're all launching now.
To follow up on that, last year, the fund board decided that we need to be in contact with all of the bishops about what we can do and how we can work together. And last year's or this year's letter went out in February, just before the House of Bishops meeting, was just introducing ourselves in case people didn't know about us, and giving them contact information. It worked out fairly well to start. We got a couple of contributions unsolicited, and one bishop contacted us because he had a deacon who had a great personal emergency, and we were able to help that deacon. In fact, the bishop was one of the first people I saw at General Convention in Austin, and he was effusive in his thanks and said, "If you ever need anything from me, let me know." Unfortunately, he's retiring next year, but our next letter, which will go out in February to all the diocesan bishops, is going to emphasize two things. One is that there's still a discrepancy between the AED records of deacons and the church pension funds list of deacons, and that we would like all bishops and all dioceses to make sure that all of their deacons are listed with CPG. That may irritate one or two, but who cares? What are they going to do? The other is that we're going to point out that, and we're just quoting the CPG officials on this, that for as little as $25 a month, if you're getting it on a regular basis, like Laurie said, doesn't matter what it's called, for as little as $25 a month, if they pay the 18% pension premium on that, you become eligible to be part of the pension fund and its benefits, which include things like when you retire at 72, there's what they call a resettlement check of about $2,000. CPG is talking about developing a mini Credo for bivocational clergy, especially deacons, where instead of an 8-day program, it'd be a 4-day program. And that would be particularly geared to our order. There were some other things they were talking about a couple of weeks ago. Laurie may remember them too.
Well, a couple of the most important ones is that they are now contacting us. CPG goes out and educates people about the pension fund, and they underwrite the organization that's putting on the event where
Right.
they educate. So CPG contacted me last week to ask if they could underwrite the Deacons Triennial that's happening a year from now in Newport, Providence, Rhode Island. I don't know if it's big bucks, but I know that they're offering, they have a process. You lay out your budget, and then you are allowed to provide the information, and then they give you what they give you. But they also intend to be at the triennial, advising deacons and strategizing with deacons about how do we work this out? How do we deal with these bishops? And how do we, everyone says it's the bishops that are the problem. I don't know if even the bishops are the problem. I think it's just the culture. We're in a situation where we really are adapting. This is an adaptive situation. The definition of diaconate is changing, and the definition of priest is changing too. But we're in a very interesting place with regard to how this is all going to work out. There was one other thing that I wanted to say, and I just found this out because my daughter is a seminarian at Yale. And everyone's so terribly worried about seminary debt for priests and all this nonsense. And so she received an invitation to go to something that was called Success After Seminary. It was a partnership between CPG and the the Episcopal Church Foundation. They took all the Yale seminarians and seminarians from all over the country, flew them to Philadelphia, put them up for a long weekend, gave them a little bit of financial education, and then they gave them a chit to retire $5,000 of their seminary debt. This was funded by the Lilly Foundation, the church pension group, and the Episcopal Church Foundation. Now, I was in the CPG building when I was having this conversation with my daughter, and I went up to the guy with the fund. We were there for the fund meeting, and I went up to the guy and I said, "You always say you can't do Credo for deacons because deacons don't pay assessments because they're not in your pension fund. Neither are all these seminarians. How come they got a nice weekend in Philadelphia?" And he's like, "Well, that was paid for by the Lilly Fund." And I'm like, "Okay, so go get a Lilly Fund grant to take us to Credo." So, and he was, oh, that's a great idea. So the idea that people are thinking outside of the box is really quite inspiring, and CPG is leading the pack.
In fact, I think one of their other officials went so far as to say that if it's for a potential market, they're willing to fund it.
That's exactly right.
So if deacons are potential paying members of CPG, they'd be willing, they specifically said they might be willing to do some sort of similar program to what your daughter went through in the greater New York area, because it would draw from all of the deacons from Province 1, Province 2, and down to Province 3.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because I do think it's not that conversation, which I was part of too, Keith, happened before this other conversation, in the sense that the business about the 46% statistic was not, we were not referencing that statistic. I think when I've had the conversation with Frank Armstrong, a couple conversations since that fund meeting, he's the COO, he's the guy in charge, he's the guy that writes the checks, and he's the one that's saying, "Oh, let's do that." So we'll see. But I feel like we're talking quite a bit. Maybe there would be some questions. I don't know. What do you think, Keith? Do you have anything further?
Not really. No, I'm willing to field questions, comments.
I am writing a monthly, if you're a member of AED, you should get a monthly email called Deacon Update. And every month I am now writing a column that I'm going to memorialize in a blog or something, I think, where I talk about things that I know about CPG that are just really horrible things that people are constantly struggling with. And the next month, I'm going to talk about the new expanded eligibility. And then the month after that, I'm going to write about what do you do if you've got $56,000 in arrears because you've been the archdeacon of Podunk, Iowa, and they've owed you for 20 years. So that's going to be an interesting conversation as well.
So we've got about 20 minutes before the end of our program, and we'd love to have some conversation among our participants. What are you thinking now that you've heard all about the waves and the different economic realities about the fund and the way CPG is supporting? What are your questions and concerns and your experiences with all of this?
I'd like to make a comment. It took 14 years for me to be able to participate in church pension. I was the executive director of a small not-for-profit where I did not have any benefits. I had always been told that church pension would cover a deacon if the bishop approved the ministry, your ministry and the ministry that you're working at in the diocese. It took 3 times of application because CPG put a twist on it, in so much that they wanted to see in the job description that you actually did pastoral care for the clients that you were serving. Now, because my not-for-profit was not a religious not-for-profit, it was a twist to do it, but we finally inserted the words provide pastoral care to clients, and they finally approved it. So one of the things I want to state is that it is not impossible if you are part of a not-for-profit community and you don't receive benefits and you speak to your bishop or even your canon to the ordinary, you really can apply for church pension benefits.
Yes, this is a huge issue.
Right.
And there are several mechanisms whereby people who run nonprofits, whether that are even tangentially related to their diaconate.
Right.
But the whole thing of the pastoral care thing, that is an outdated concept because they don't know that we don't generally provide pastoral care. And so that it's a priestly model. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the thing that I would like for CPG to look at, to stop throwing up obstacles. Clearly, I'm running a shelter for homeless women and children. I'm clearly running a ministry in the diocese that I'm serving. And then to sort of put, when you're not a religious 501c3, to put in other obstacles makes it really frustrating.
Did you have a letter of extension from your bishop?
Yes.
Okay, that's weird.
The bishop had to sign it. Everyone signed it. Everything was approved. They sent it back to the bishop twice.
Oh, I would love to know who did this.
I have a name I can give you offline later on.
Yeah.
When was that, Christine? When was that? Like 14 years ago?
No, I started applying, I started trying to get approval from the bishop. The bishop kept hemming and hawing. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. Finally, we just kept beating him down. But this person, it took a long time to get the bishop on board. When we finally got the bishop on board via the canon to the ordinary, then the other obstacles came from CPG.
That's interesting. I'd love to know who did that because they're just flat ass wrong.
Right.
There's been a seat change at CPG in the last 2 to 3 years, though.
Okay.
So if this has been in the last 2 to 3 years, somebody's screwing up there. But if it was like back around 2014 or before, that was probably the old way of doing things. Like
it was 2014, 2015.
Yeah, right on the cusp there.
Right on the cusp of that.
One of the most interesting.
I just want to bring up, Lori, was that for a very long time, I think you remember this, that I was associates at the cathedral and various parishes where I was actually the deacon in charge. All of that time that we served and was paid, none of that can be recouped through church pension. And that's problematic also.
Why is that?
Because I wasn't on church pension, so I've missed vesting opportunities.
Were you paid by a religious entity?
Yeah.
You can go back and recoup that. Why do you think you can't?
The diocese has to make them pay the assessment. The diocese don't pay it. They have to make the parish pay it.
That's right. That's exactly, that's the story I was telling you earlier.
Right.
I've got a person that got this situation. The assessments in arrears are $17,000. The accumulated interest is $56,000. This is coming down the pike. It's a big deal.
That's a shame.
Yep. She wanted to pay for it herself out of her savings so as to render herself eligible. And I said, wait.
My concern is that I could have been vested by now, but I'm not. Now that I'm on a diocesan staff, now I'm starting over, but I could have been vested 4 years ago, at least 3.5, 3 years ago.
But you know what? Let's talk offline.
Okay.
What other comments and questions do we have?
Hello, this is, my name's Paul. I'm with the Diocese of Fond du Lac. Next month is my 1-year anniversary as a deacon.
Congrats.
And I work full-time as an engineer. I'm not compensated at all. That's kind of the gist, I think, in our diocese. And I don't know if you guys cover this or not, and maybe I just didn't understand it, but for someone who does not get compensated at all, we're a fairly small diocese, and I'm wondering, I heard a little bit about educational opportunities and ways that with partnering up with the Lily Fund and the Credo and things of that nature, are you saying there are opportunities there for deacons who do not get compensated, therefore are not contributing to CPG?
There are very few,
Okay.
but what there are is of value. And I would urge you to make a connection with CPG and educate yourself up on it, because since they now have reduced the minimum compensation per month to be counted as assessable compensation, any amount that is anything other than what's covered by your receipts, if you are turning in your receipts on a monthly basis or something like that. But there are dioceses right now that are actually considering, my diocese, for example, I'm in Diocese of Massachusetts, and they're considering creating a requirement that their parishes compensate their deacons $50 a month for the exact reason of rendering us eligible over time for a pension. It has to be over several months. It has to be consistent. You can't get $1,000 a year. Many deacons get like a continuing ed allowance or whatever, or one $600 check. That will not get you there. That'll give you 1 month of compensated assessments. But there are ways. This is the educational task at hand, is to look at the systems and then see, okay, so how can we fit in? And then not walk away mad. What happens time and time and time again, and Chris can attest to this, I'm sure. There are probably half a dozen times in these 14 years where she just wanted to say F you to the whole shebang. But if you get to the right person, lots of deacons will talk to the person that answers the phone, and those people don't understand our circumstances. And that's the other task that CPG is working on, the interior education of their own personnel. And until we get to what the priests have, which is people that are sitting there craftily helping them to create a job description that gets the maximum amount of eligibility and benefits, until we have that same arrangement, we will be undercompensated and we will be ineligible for all kinds of things that really we should be eligible for. And I'm really worried about this. I'll tell you, I am getting calls from around the country from bishops that are asking me, do you have a format for a deacon's mass? Because I want to send a deacon out to, Regina, South Dakota, and, give communion to the last 10 gray heads in the pews. But I'm not going to give them anything. Well, that's not what a diaconate is today. That's not, it might be appropriate for Regina. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have that. But I guess what I'm saying is, if people are keeping churches open on our backs for free, we need to assess what it is that we will be receiving. Right now we're in the buyer's market because we can get a job when a non-stipendiary priest can't get a job because they know that they have to give them something or they'll be unhappy. Us, well, go ahead. They're just a deacon. They don't need anything. So it's really,
Lori, one of the things that we really asked our bishop to do is that when deacons cover churches, parishes,
right,
whether it's for one Sunday, that they're paid the supply rate that a supply priest would be paid.
Are you in Maryland, right?
I'm in Maryland now, but this happened in the Diocese of Newark.
Okay,
So
I'll tell you.
Who provided coverage or preached once a month in a parish, we do the same amount of work, the same amount of research. We were paid supply for our services. As we used to say, deacons are not free. We are, we have to put in the work also. And because Newark represents an extreme from the very wealthy to the very poor, we needed a model of economic equity there.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens in all of this, because I think the racial and age issues are finally coming to the fore. There are dioceses that need a bunch of, I know this is pejorative, but they need a bunch of liturgical specialist mini priests. I mean, Haiti, for example, just ordained 18 mini priests. But the rest of us are going to have to be pretty careful, because there's so much economic stress in the church as a whole that it's really easy just to turn to the deacon. And when you turn to the deacon who has this this identity as an official servant, we are very vulnerable to that kind of an appeal. And essentially what we're doing, I think, in some ways, is we're allowing the church to not do the hard work of adaptation to a new economic reality. If we step in and do it all for free, the church is going to squander their deacons' charisms of outreach and prophecy, and they're going to end up maintaining tiny little churches that would be much, much healthier if they were combined with the Moravians and the Methodists and the Lutherans in town. So there's some real economic pressure issues here, and I'm worried about us through our own we have incredible generosity. We spin gold from straw. We never give up on anything if there's no money for it. We are pre-adapted conditions of scarcity. That's what we have to offer. We will teach you how to do this, church, but we will not do it for you. That's really where we have to stand.
Laura, you mentioned.
Go ahead.
You mentioned earlier that archdeacons are compensated.
In many dioceses, they are.
Okay, but not.
It's
not across the board.
By no means.
Okay.
And this is the other thing too that is so disturbing, is that in many, the poor dioceses don't pay anybody anymore. The priests are not working full time. The deacons, I met an 82-year-old deacon that is driving a school bus in a frigid northern diocese to pay for his wife's medical bills. I mean, and he's an archdeacon. And he gets no compensation and does all this work for free, trains all these people, and keeps a little tiny church open with his own financial contributions. So we're talking about a church that we cannot pick up more than we can carry, and we can't allow our charism to be squandered. Because if you sent 2 community organizing deacons out to all those little tiny churches who wandered the neighborhood to see what Jesus was doing in the neighborhood and where we could be of help, you'd gather a Eucharistic community. You don't have to send a deacon out there with a pot of magic wafers to keep the last 10 gray heads happy. You send some real deacons out there and we'll kick them into shape. We'll find something to do.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what other questions or comments do we have out there?
Well, a side comment is that I love the conversation regarding the waves. In my formation, I fell in love with Suzanne's book that describes it, and it was exciting but also frustrating, because then I started to see how, that's going on right now. So maybe, I don't know if you guys have covered this in the past, but a future topic would be awesome to talk about those waves in more depth, and possibly how deacons can exist when multiple waves are going on in their own diocese. Because I think you articulated it really well, that it's not a sequential thing, that they're just kind of all going on.
You know, that's what the internet did for deacons, is the first 10 years of diaconal reality on the internet was us arguing all through the 90s on who was the right kind of deacon.
Yeah.
And what we finally figured out was we're all the right kind of deacon. We're just contextually defined. And that's very difficult for the church as a whole to understand. It makes training very difficult, and it makes supervision terrible, and it makes really makes bishops crazy, because they don't know what they're getting when a new deacon comes in. And it's very painful for deacons. But fortunately, we're now to the point where Suzanne has done enough description of it. And I'm actually trying to write some stuff on this stuff too, because I was always taught that they were sequential, but they're really not. And what's really weird is they change with your bishop. So you might be wave 7 today, and then you move, you're in the same diocese, you get a new bishop, and man, oh man, he's back in 4, and suddenly you're a real problem. And with the way people move around, it's also a problem. So we all have to educate ourselves about this. This is theology, economics, justice, charisms, all kinds of things all mingled together. And I say to people that deacon theology is generally made in the absence of deacons. Strategies and policies and everything about us is made when we're not at the table. And we need a few deacon theologians who are going to run with the big dogs and publish in, the Anglican Theological Review and some of this stuff, because we have very few spokespeople and they assume we're too undereducated to participate. And we can't be that. We have to be able to articulate our own interests.
So if you're searching for a new deacon, a new bishop, the deacons should try to explain the 7th wave rather than the 4th wave.
They need to ask the bishops, can you tell me which wave you served with? And when he doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, then you educate him and say, which wave do you think you would need us to tell you about? We're here, you're coming, we know our context, and we want wave X. Because you guys are there, you know what you need. He doesn't.
It's only that easy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you can tell I'm a firebrand, but in Massachusetts, they did not ask. The stupidest question is, do you like deacons? Are you friendly with deacons? Do you approve of deacons? No. Tell us about the last time you worked with deacons. How many times have you worked closely with deacons? What different kinds of deacons are you familiar with? Have you read Suzanne Watson Epting? Those are the questions.
Right.
It's a tough, you're in Vermont, right, Catherine?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough up there. It's tough in those dioceses where it's very clear that the mini priest may very well be what is needed up there.
But
You don't need
we don't want that.
No, I don't think you do, but I bet some of those people up there think they do.
Yeah.
Well, I think they did for a while.
Yeah,
but
yeah, not anymore. Yeah.
I think not.
In my diocese, we had a strategic plan.
But
And in that strategic plan, we're a huge, rich diocese. And in that strategic plan, the deacons were listed under what was needed for clergy support. Clergy meaning priests. And I called up the strategic plan people and I said, no, they go in paragraph 7 under outreach to the underprivileged and everybody else. And they're like, oh, but our priests are, it's terrible. They're all working 3/4 time. It's like, heck with that. You want to prop up business as usual, fine. But I'm not playing.
So we do have a question here online from Paul asking, who is the point of contact at CPG?
I wouldn't start with them. I wouldn't. I'd start, I would go online and I would look at their webinars and I would get as much information as I possibly could. But I bet you would not have a happy experience if you called. I am not pleased at all. They have farmed out a lot of their advising to people who are completely unfamiliar with the diaconate and have no ability to answer our questions. And that's really bad because they used to have you should be able to call the authority and get the right answer.
That was one of the things that we had, we were complaining about a month ago when we had our board meeting at CPG, is that there's no particular person to call who knows anything specifically about the diaconate. And they really need, they need a range of people who can, who are conversant in our issues. I think they heard it, but CPG is a big ship, and it's going to take a little time for them to turn the ship in a different direction.
Yeah, and I personally have heard of this idea of we need a CPG ombudsperson. I don't find it acceptable that only one person at CPG understands our problems.
Mhm.
I think that every call should result in solid information.
Mhm. Customer service.
Yeah, customer service.
Everybody needs to be knowledgeable because there's 3,000 of us. They
Yeah.
need to know how to service.
But it just kills me. So many deacons. I have a little cottage industry of people who I'm coaching through CPG, and some of them are in really bad situations. And it just burns me when they call up CPG, and deacons are very uncomfortable talking to CPG, and they don't educate themselves. They don't ask the right questions, and they don't push. You know, someone tells them something stupid, and they'll just go, "Oh, okay, I guess that's okay." But, you know, when you know what you're doing and you know you've got a right to enforce, you don't give up. You don't give up. And we have to think creatively, and we have to be, I mean, I just don't talk to any of the minions anymore. I go as high up as I can get. But they get it. High up, they get it. I'm confident they do.
So are there any last questions or comments?
I'll make one last a distinction between AED and the fund.
Oh, yeah.
The fund, all deacons are members of the fund. There's no charge. We're incorporated so that once you're ordained to the diaconate and you're not further ordained, you're a member. That's why everybody gets a ballot once a year from us. AED is a membership organization, so you need to pay dues to be part of that and to be active. Now, you can still go to their conferences at the non-member rates.
It's all the same rate.
Is it? Okay. The fund doesn't have any membership meeting. We have a membership meeting. The only thing we do at it is count the votes. We don't do any programs, but we will be advertising our what we can do for people probably more often in the near future. So
Yeah, and I'd like to make a pitch for AED. A lot of people don't see what AED does for deacons because they don't know what it's doing behind the scenes. But AED is incredible.
The resources are just, you just can't beat them.
They really have done. I was the original slacker deacon before I got the job. I was never a reliable member of AED. But when I got inside of it and I realized all the things they do all the time for every deacon, whether you're a member or not, I'm now the big rah-rah girl for AED. And I think people don't even know. They have no idea. They just know that it's $40 for an already expensive, unpaid hobby that their spouse is already irritated how much money they throw at it, so they don't join. But I would urge everybody to join. And quite frankly,
tax deductible.
It is tax deductible, but I also feel that I think we should go to the non-membership model as well. I really do. I think we've got to have an open model because the more people we talk to, we're trying to keep people out by making them pay. We're actually trying to gather people up. And I would urge everybody to come to the AED triennial. CPG will be coming to that triennial. I know it's a ways away, but not for you guys in New Hampshire and Vermont. It's in Providence a year from now, and you will be able to have a private personal consultation with a CPG person right there. They're taking appointments. So they're not just giving us money, but they're also taking us appointments. And I'm hoping that we can have them do some general education. And I really want them to hear some of the stories of how our money is structured so that they don't call it a salary, because they know how crafty churches can be to make sure that we don't get anything. And it's going to be interesting. They're coming up with stories themselves now about things that bishops are telling them. So they're doing a good job. They really are.
Very good. Well, I'd like to do a little bit of promo myself. I'm going to encourage you to please come to the Province One website and follow what's going on with the deacons as well as around the rest of the country. We have these sections for our ministry networks, and if you go to the section on diaconal ministry, you will find that we have all sorts of resources that we put here.
Mhm.
What we most put out is the video archive. Here is the place on the Province One website that
Oh,
has all of the programs that we have recorded over time
Mhm.
of deacons talking on the road to Emmaus. And
Mhm.
as I said earlier, its goal is to have you all sharing your stories, being able to share ideas of ministry that you've been successful with, of helping each other to start similar and contextualized projects in different places, to celebrate innovative and new ministries. If any of you have stories that you'd like to share, we're always looking to folks to be able to
Mhm.
come and be a part of it. Usually it's about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes on the third Thursday of the third Thursday of the month. So feel free to please come and look at the videos. I'll have the recording of tonight's up probably by tomorrow, and you can please share that with other deacons who might need the information that we've shared tonight about the association for Episcopal deacons, as well as for the fund for the diaconate. We'll
Mhm.
have that all up for you to be able to share. As a way to close in prayer, I'd like to ask us just to take a moment and take this prayer from the Franciscans, who I usually use to close each of the Deacons Talkings meetings. So please, God, bless us with the discomfort at easy answers and half-truths, superficial relationships, so that we may live deep within our hearts. Oh God, bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and the exploitation of people, so that we may find the courage to work for justice, freedom, and peace. Oh God, bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and turn their pain to joy. And oh God, please bless us with enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we risk doing what others claim cannot be done. We ask this all in your name, through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
that's a really good diaconal prayer.
Mhm.
I wish you all a very blessed evening, a holy Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully next month to be able to walk and talk about things that are going on for diaconal ministry. Have a great evening.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
invitation to be part of this.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Do you need to hang us on, and you need us to hang